Good evening, everyone. Happy Tuesday evening. Thank you so much for joining us for our fourth episode of Filling in the Gaps. I'm joined with a panel of really great voices in the education community in Oklahoma. I'll introduce them all in a second and we'll start our discussion. But first, I want to thank Scott Mitchell for supporting our platform and Ryan Welton, who's behind the scenes. That was his lovely music off the top. So we've got some great support from Scott and the team at News 9 and News on 6. In this series, looking at how state and district spending and programming can address pandemic-related barriers to K-12 education, we've talked about a really broad variety of topics. We've talked about students who are most affected, models for data that offer a peek into what the pandemic did in terms of unfinished learning for students of different socioeconomic backgrounds and different schools. You can find all of those previous episodes on our website, so be sure to check those out. But tonight's episode is really focusing on rural schools, and I think we'll also hear some really interesting thoughts on a mental health component of the recovery for students in schools. So first, let's go around the table, introduce everyone. Erica Wright is with the Coalition for Rural Schools. She'll be here talking about some of their advocacy work and some of their policy priorities. We have Carolyn Shaw with the Opportunity Project out of Tulsa, and she has some great thoughts on mental health recovery in schools. And then Dr. John Cox, we're actually going to start off with an insight from him about his district. He's the superintendent of Peg's Public Schools. You've got 200 students. You're up in northeastern Oklahoma. Tell us a little bit about your district.
Yes, absolutely. We're what you call a rural school. And so I'm so glad to see Erica on here tonight because I think her group represents what we try to push. And so I've just been blessed to be here at Peg's for 28 years as the superintendent principal and, get to know the parents and the grandparents and we're just one big family. And I think that's what's so important about rural schools is that we're community and we know each other. So I think that gives us an advantage. But I'm just really proud to be on here because I think it's so important to give back and give back to our schools and advocate for them, and especially for our children, who that should be our total focus in everything that we do.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Cox. And talk a little bit about, you were seeing firsthand in a rural district what some of the impacts of the pandemic were. Maybe just tell us a little bit about what your students experienced and your staff.
Well, as you know, and as most people know, it's been a really difficult year and a half. And so as we came back to this past summer school, we were excited because the COVID viruses have slowed down and we were able to have some normalcy. And because of the Turkey Nation, they helped us fund a full-scale summer school with most of our staff here. And we were able to try to bridge that gap a little bit. And really, our teachers and staff did a great job on doing some catch-up with our students. But then we were able to use our CARES money starting the year in August and use that money specifically to hire outside reading interventionists who have been coming in 3 days a week and really focusing in on the most severe children where the gaps are. And so we definitely saw a learning gap. We're very appreciative of the federal funds that have come in to help us. We just need to make sure that we're very prudent with those funds and use them exactly to the best of our ability to help a child.
And with some of the programming that your district's come up with, you've talked about, you've gotten some federal grant money for school counselors, a school counselor to help with some of that socio-emotional loss. And, we talked a little bit today about how meaningful that was to your district. But what are some of the other programs that your district's using to address unfinished learning and other sorts of issues that students have experienced?
Well, I know we'll talk about mental health issues here in a little bit, but just to address one more time on being able to be part of the counselor corps and have the funds to be able to hire an LPC. And we were fortunate that we had a retired person that was an LPC in our community who has been working here part-time, and we were able to advance that person up to be a full-time. And that's such a crucial thing for our schools because through the isolation, through everything that our students went through last year, it was so important for us to reach out and develop that bond again. But we use all of our federal grants basically towards hiring personnel that can actually have individual instruction with the kids and make a direct impact. So whether it's special ed funds or Title I or Title VI, any of those funds, we put those together to give our school an advantage to help those children. And really, and again, I'll say it, and we'll say this more, that that's our advantage of being small rural, is that we can look at every child as an individual and focus in on what their specific needs are.
What are some of the individual needs that you've seen? You touched a little bit on isolation and learning gaps. Like, what are your students going through?
Well, I think those are two of the most crucial things. It's very difficult, and I'm a firm believer that a child needs a teacher in front of them. There's a small population that they can learn anywhere and they can excel through virtual, but we need to be able to have that child in the classroom and basically stay right on top of them, work with them, comfort them, encourage them. But it's very difficult to do over Zoom and through virtual. So I'm so glad that we haven't had to this year had to go out and go to virtual. And so we've just been really proactive in everything that we've been doing to be able to stay here. But we have to have the children here for us to do a great job. And I think that's what my teachers and staff will tell you.
Absolutely. And Erica Wright, you are a grassroots kind of advocate and organizer for rural schools across the state. We've heard a little bit about what the PEGS district has had to work through during the pandemic and some of their solutions. Maybe talk a little bit about, the work your organization's doing and what are your priorities right now.
So thank you for having me, first of all. And as you mentioned, the Oklahoma Rural Schools Coalition, we are a grassroots organization started by myself. I'm a parent of 2 kids in Noble Public Schools. I served on the school board, and I'm also president of our local public schools foundation. So I've been really invested for a long time in public school advocacy. And we kind of got going back a couple of years ago when the 4-day school issue came about with Senate Bill 441. And we've just grown from there, and it's snowballed from there. And so we rebranded ourselves to include all rural schools in Oklahoma. And so within our group and our organization, we have about 6,000 members that are anywhere from parents and grandparents to educators, school administrators, even students, business leaders, and communities. And our goal is to just bring everyone together in one place where they can start to learn how to empower themselves to engage and be a voice effectively at the Capitol to support their rural schools when it comes to legislative season, which is upon us. So, when you talk about kind of the goals and the things and the priorities that we have in front of us, the filing deadline for legislative bills that we're going to see hit is not until, I believe, January 20th. And so right now, we don't really have any specific bills yet that we're watching or waiting for them all to be filed so that we can then dump them kind of into our system and kind of decide at that point what we're going to advocate for. However, one of the things that I'm a big believer when you talk about leadership, that leadership is much less about the leader and more about the ship. And so when you are looking at advocating for policy or developing policy, you really need to get the input of the ship, right? So we just recently ran a poll the beginning of this month within our membership of 6,000 members to see what are the issues that you feel are most impactful for your rural school districts right now, whether those are threats or those are things that are positive that you want to see continue. What's important to you? And that's where we start off developing what our legislative goals are and what we're going to track and champion, because there's a lot of education legislation out there. It can get kind of mind-boggling at sometimes. So we try to stay pretty focused with what our members come up with. And so this year, we've got 5 points that we're looking at as far as legislation that we're watching for. The first, so this poll was taken on December 10th. We had over 1,200 votes included into this poll. And by a mile, the number one issue that our rural school supporters are concerned with is protecting public school dollars from being taken to use for private school tuitions in any form, whether that's tax credits or vouchers. And this is kind of a hot button. It was a hot button in last year's legislative session. And so that is, that is one thing that our members are very, very concerned about. It's difficult to explain. It's kind of complicated for the lay person, but when you look at school funding as a pie, right? So the pie is only so big. When you have kids who have never been involved with utilizing those tax dollars for private schools, all of a sudden they become part of the pie, then your pieces get smaller. And so it's a very complicated discussion. We're seeing it a lot in public right now, but our parents want to have their voice, the innovation of rural schools included, school choice matters for rural schools as well when it comes to policy. And that is something that is very important to our members, is protecting the public dollars that should be going into our public schools from going into private schools for the use for private school tuition. The second thing that came out was supporting positive pro-educator policies that come about this session around teacher recruitment and teacher retention. As everybody knows, we've been in a teacher shortage for quite some time, and it doesn't look like those things are in the pathway of getting better. And so any type of bills that come out that are supportive of teachers and keeping our quality teachers in the classroom are things that we're going to fight for. On the flip side, last session we did see some pretty egregious teacher attack bills come out. So anything that comes out on the flip side, we're going to fight against. So privatization, public dollars in public schools, pro-teacher policy. The third one, which I'm so glad that Ms. Shaw is here today to talk about this, because mental health support for our public school students and their families is third on the list of issues that were important to our members. And I won't belabor that because I'm not the expert in it, she is, but we are very much as a group unified behind coming up with solutions legislatively and supporting those solutions to support our kids and families that are struggling with their mental health. And then finally, there's two more. We've always been big supporters of local control. Sometimes I think in politics, the term local control tends to be a little bit of lip service, right? Like we talk about local control is very important, but when the rubber hits the road, it's more like local control if we like what you're doing, as evidenced with Senate Bill 441 with the 4-day school calendar. So we're very much still involved in keeping our eyes on any legislation that has a goal of taking away local control from locally elected community members when it comes to decisions about their schools. And then finally, the fifth was, and this was on our list last year as well, was continuing to support and fight for better access to affordable and reliable broadband and internet in rural areas. So those are kind of our 5 focuses this year. Of course, there's always things that show up that you didn't expect. So there could be some other things come in. Last year there was a big upset with the school funding formula that was not supported by any rural school administrator that I spoke with, but yet it still passed. And so there's always things that are going to be surprises. And if we base this year off of what happened last year, there were a lot of surprises and switcheroos and shell games going on. So that's our goal, is to keep rural voters updated with what's going on at the Capitol in a easy to digest format where they have easy action items and connecting them with being a voice with their elected officials at the Capitol.
Okay, Erica, thank you. And I guess, what do you think about how key is this legislative session to pandemic recovery in schools?
I think this legislation is incredibly key. I mean, we had, like I said, last year, from my perspective, and the goals we were looking at last year for rural schools, last year was a train wreck. I don't expect that this year. I'm hopeful that this year will be better. It will be more positive for public schools, but I'm just not so sure. I think we're going to see a battle royale commence when it comes to the top issue that we identified, being the public dollars to private schools. I think that issue is not going to go away. And so I don't really know if I answered your question, but yeah, I think this legislative session is going to be a real tipping point for where the rubber meets the road on supporting our public schools and getting them back to recovering and being healthy and thriving. Or are we going to pull the rug out from under them in the middle of the pandemic with poor policy, which we showed they were willing to do last year? So I think this is going to be a key legislative session that might be a tipping point for the health of public education going forward in Oklahoma.
Superintendent Cox, what are some of the issues that you're looking forward to in this legislative session in terms of what you feel the needs are with your district?
Well, I was kind of excited to see what the Equalization Board had when they gave their numbers this past week. But I also appreciate what Senator Thompson was saying about we need to be really cautious on how we spend the excess money. I know one thing for rural schools, and because if we hire in our schools, if we hire one or two people too many, then that can affect a budget 2 to 3 years down the line. And so we're really trying to use our CARES money right now so that it can impact 2 to 3 years. And so with the decline in students in the rural areas and the shift that's going on where they're going to more of the urban areas, we have to be really, and I said it earlier, but prudent with our money and really have a long-term look at how our finances are going to be. So I'm excited about the extra money that we may have, because that may help us be able to find more personnel to work more individually with our students. I just don't know where we're going to find those people yet. And we're going to have to do a great public relations campaign just to get those 18-year-olds going into college to say, hey, I would love to be a teacher. Because right now they're looking at being a teacher and having to work till they're 65 years old and maybe topping out at $55,000. And so that's not very appealing to young people that are coming in and going, well, hey, I can do this job for $40,000 and not have all the concerns that teachers have. And really, probably the biggest message is that our teachers have really taken it on their shoulders to try to make things work. And I'm so proud of the teachers I have here, because they stepped out there and they had to learn a whole new system to try to take care of kids and doing double duty. And and teachers for the most part do not complain about that, because they're in it for the child. So I'm hoping the legislature looks at those things to really be proactive on helping our teachers and maybe freeing up some of the ties that they're bound by in the classroom, and just getting back to teaching again. We've gone so far away from doing the basics, getting back to just math and reading and laying the foundation. And we've got to get back to there instead of all the arguments about all the other things that are going on. And really, that's my message is just we need to get back and lay that foundation for a child to be who they want to be someday. And it sounds so simple, but I think that's where our focus needs to return. And so I'm hoping this legislative session, I hope there's a real focus on, undoing some of the mandates that we have on our shoulders and allowing the teachers to teach again, and also getting our parents involved in their students' academics. And those two things put together, I think, will be, I don't know, I just think that it'd be extremely beneficial to our children.
And I'm kind of curious what ways you feel the current funding to schools, big federal money, some additional state money, it's sounding like. What are some of the strategies that your district is utilizing to kind of ensure that any positive outcomes are going to last and are going to carry on within your district and not end when the funding runs out?
I think it's twofold, and we really have to know that this funding will end. It's one-time funds, and so here we're just trying to gauge maybe a decline, because in rural areas some of us are extremely remote, and so when you lose families, you lose those kids that go with them. So we really have to be smart on how we allocate funds. And so what we've been able to do is use the CARES money to pay existing personnel, which is part of the CARES plan, and to keep your school open. And then you can fast forward that money on to the next year, and to be able to use that to keep those teachers a year longer. But I think we're going to have to be extremely careful with the federal money, because we've gotten used to this vast amount of money coming at us, and people are wanting us to spend it in their direction. so quick because we get so many emails every day on where can we spend that money. So I just try to use mine towards personnel because I know that's the most critical area that reaches a child, and that's a good thing that we and us rural schools are really good about the parent community school relationship that we have, and again that's our advantage, and so I think that will overcome a lot of things, and so I've been doing this a long time, and I've watched the trends. I've been a superintendent since 1994, and I've watched the ups and downs in the economy and how we've had to deal with those. And I've seen the new programs come in that were, I would like to say, more of a gimmick than really something that made a long-lasting effect. And I would like for our schools to have that local control that Erica talked about. Even if it's a simple thing like they can do 4 days a week, and really motivate their staff and motivate their kids to do what they want. They have less absences. Those are things that we need to stand up for those communities to be able to do. And so I'm proud of what we can do. I've been here long enough where I know that the grandparents were the parents when I was here. So we have a little bit of edge on how we can handle kids and motivate them. So I know I rambled a little bit there, Augusta, but
great insight.
I'm really passionate about what we can do for a child. And really my life has been blessed because of public education. And it's time that we give back and we push and try to do something for that child.
Okay. And Dr. Cox, I kind of have one more kind of line of questioning I would love to hear from you about. And then Carolyn, thank you for waiting so patiently. We'll kind of segue into talking a little bit about mental health solutions in schools. One of the requirements of the ESSER plans was to get feedback from stakeholders, and there, I'm kind of curious to hear about what sort of stakeholders you have in your rural district, and what do those partnerships look like, and what are their influences on any spending, if any?
It's very difficult out in some of our rural areas, and I represent one that's pretty remote. So we're not in the city; we're out in the country, and so a lot of ours is actually staff that are members of our community and teachers that are members of our community, because I feel like I think they're involved in it, and so they know what we need to have happen. And so in our area, we only have like 3 stores and a fire department, and so we reach out to those groups to get their input. But it's very difficult to say what the federal government, sometimes the federal government does not understand rural Oklahoma or rural schools. They just think they can do a mandate and then this is how it's going to be, because several schools across our state don't use websites. And we were one of them. We use apps to notify our parents and let them know what's going on and send our notes home. So all our parents are aware of our communication tool. And so the discussion with State Department of Ed is, well, you got to use the CARE monies to go pay for the website so that you can put it on there. And in my mind, I'm going, well, that's just a waste of money. I can use that $2,000 to make a difference in tutoring a child. And so they don't quite understand sometimes what rural Oklahoma is, but that's our job to get out there and let them know. Broadband was mentioned earlier, extremely difficult out in our area. You may get sketchy broadband. 3 different cellular services are out here, but some are sketchy at the best, and it's very difficult to get internet to homes. And so that is a real concern. And I think Erica mentioned that as her third on her list. And so that's something I'm really going to be pushing hard, because we need fiber optic out into these houses that are remote and down in the hills and gullies, because those are the ones that we can't reach. So that's something that I will be pushing very hard. And I know with the money that we have coming, the E-rate money and all that, those are things that have been made more flexible to help with that. But I think that needs to be a statewide push.
Okay. And Carolyn, thank you so much for being here. And why don't we start out with, tell us a little bit about the Opportunity Project out of Tulsa and the work that you do.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. And I'm really just humbled to be joined by Dr. Cox and Erica, and just really value the work that you all are doing across the state. So Thank you for your advocacy on behalf of our kids. So the Opportunity Project is what's called an out-of-school time intermediary. And basically what that means is we support all of the youth serving organizations within the Tulsa region. So while we're not doing any direct work with young people, we are supporting all of those organizations who do. So our main purpose in being is to take the lift off of those community organizations, nonprofits, faith groups, after school programs, all kinds of individuals and groups who are interested in positive youth development and serving our young people outside the classroom, helping them with things like data collection, recruitment, training, professional development, all kinds of things that an organization that may be small and not able to have the capacity for those kinds of functions, it doesn't have to worry about, because we take it off their shoulders and say, hey, we want you out there on the front lines serving kids in the best possible way with the highest quality program, and we're going to do everything we can to support you in that work. So that's what we are here to do. In Tulsa, we're very fortunate that we have a great established relationship with our school district, Tulsa Public Schools, and they are big believers in the concept of expanded learning. So we're talking about every kind of learning that a young person experiences outside the walls of a classroom. So that's everything from enrichment programming, academic tutoring, athletics, all of those kinds of things that shape a young person and help us, as Dr. Cox was saying, help young people determine, the direction for their life, help them find their passion, and maybe most importantly, connect them with a caring adult. That is really what we know to be one of the most important factors for young people who are struggling, and really for all young people. So having those interactions and those engagements with really caring adults, be it inside school or outside of school, is one of the most critical things that we feel like we can do for young people, particularly now during the pandemic. And we do believe that it is ongoing. Our kids are still feeling the repercussions, still dealing with those consequences of unfinished learning, isolation, and all the other obstacles and hurdles that Erica and Dr. Cox mentioned. So we really want to make sure that we are leveraging all of the resources that are available, all of the learning, not only from within our region and across our state and across the country, but really using what we know to be best practice in service of getting young people back to thriving. So that's our bread and butter, is to be here to work on behalf of those youth serving organizations.
Okay, and I read a blog post from your organization after the U.S. Surgeon General issued kind of a warning about the well-being of students and children right now in the United States. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we have been talking with our partners within our network for a number of years about the difficulties that a lot of young people in our area and across the state of Oklahoma have with trauma that they're bringing with them into the classroom, with other what we call adverse childhood experiences, things that negatively impact young people, and really the challenges that those bring not only into a young person's life and their trajectory, but into the classroom as well. So kids are bringing what's sometimes called the invisible backpack with them every day when they come to school. And that invisible backpack may be filled with, all kinds of wonderful experiences and hot breakfast and nurturing relationships with all kinds of family members and other adults. But on the flip side, it may not. And that invisible backpack may be full of traumatic experiences that a young person is dealing with that is really interfering with their capacity to learn in an academic setting effectively. And so we really feel like a lot of what our expanded learning partners can do is to help buffer and mitigate some of those experiences. So the Surgeon General's warning that came out is something that's usually reserved for things that we would think about, like the dangers of smoking. But this report was very specific to youth and mental health. And if you guys haven't had a chance to read it, it's on our website if you want to look at it. But it's a pretty lengthy report. It's called Protecting Youth Mental Health. And this is a real red flag for all of us who are either in the education sector or parents, caregivers, folks who care about young people. they are really struggling right now. I think we know as adults, we're all struggling, have been struggling through the pandemic, and are really trying to navigate these new waters as we move forward. And young people are no exception. And oftentimes, by virtue of the fact that they are very young and haven't been exposed to as many life experiences as adults have, they don't have the emotional vocabulary to be able to talk about how they're feeling or understand why they're frustrated, why they're angry, why they're having trouble memorizing their spelling words, whatever the case may be. We really feel like if we can give adults who work with kids the tools and training that will help them support young people and getting them back to that place where we know they can really excel to their full potential. That's what we need to do, and that's what we took away from the Surgeon General's report, was that this theme that we had been hearing from partners for several years just got raised to serious threat level, to a place where we all need to be having a conversation about what are our individual roles in supporting young people, and frankly, in supporting the adults who care about them as well. I think that's really, really important. And I think both Erica and Dr. Cox referenced, educators, the difficulties that they have been through. For any of us who aren't classroom teachers, I have trouble even imagining it. And for families, to Erica's point, families are recognizing this for themselves. This isn't, an esoteric message that doesn't resonate with families. This is something people are feeling and seeing in their own kids every single day. So this particular report from the Surgeon General, while it's a little frightening, right, to think about, all of the young people in our lives and the balance that they're hanging in. It does offer some really great concrete steps for different sectors of our communities to take in support of young people. So we really wanted to make sure that we were lifting that up for everybody from families, caregivers, schools, educators. It goes into what youth themselves can do to help mitigate some of these things. It also talks about what stakeholders, decision makers, so folks that we're talking about, like policymakers, people who are making decisions about how to best use these resources, can do in service of young people and their families. And it also even talks about what employers can do. So how can employers who, families have to work, right? So if everybody has a job to do and they need to be able to do it effectively, it's going to take a full-scale community effort for us to really understand not only the magnitude of what we're talking about, but the real concrete ways that we can get kids back to that thriving status.
Okay, and I'm assuming this looks a little bit differently in the Tulsa area than it would in like a rural district, but just in your kind of observation of the resources that are available in the community in terms of kind of wrapping around kids and making sure that those supports are even available for kids who might need them or parents who might seek them, kind of what's the pulse on resources in the community for kids?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, while there certainly are going to be very unique challenges for an urban district versus a rural district, and we recognize that, we also recognize that young people are young people. And the concept of positive youth development, the concept of community engagement, a really important thing that often gets lost in this conversation is how critical youth voice is to these conversations, actually asking kids, what do you want? What do you need? And making sure that they're part of that discussion. Those are universal across whether or not we're talking about an urban district or a rural district. And I would also say, there are some really exciting things that are happening right now as a result of the increased investment in expanded learning. So rural districts, urban districts, community partners all across the state, and whether we're talking about Dr. Cox, who may, if you have an after school program, you may be running it, you may be driving the bus, and you may be the jack of all trades. But there are resources available now that had never been available before. So the State Department of Education, through their expanded learning division and Office of 21st Century Community Learning Centers, has sort of opened up the opportunity for these community partners to be able to receive some of those funds, resources, training, development, specialized curricula that never existed before. So that's something I think, again, that we can talk about statewide, that is available to young people via these new resources that are out there. The other thing I would say is that it's just really, really critical, no matter where you live in the state of Oklahoma or elsewhere in the country, that this is something we really have to take seriously. This is not, we're not being alarmist. There are real issues at stake here. There is an incredible uptick in suicidal ideation. There is an incredible uptick in depression, anxiety. Things that we used to see even pre-pandemic when, high school students routinely, a third of them would say they were depressed, anxious, isolated. Those numbers are through the roof. So we really have to think about how are we supporting young people and acknowledge what we know now that maybe we didn't know as well a few years ago, is that emerging brain science tells us that a young person who is in a space in their brain where they're frightened, they're traumatized, they're scared, they cannot absorb academic learning, right? So you've got to get to that safety and engagement piece first so that young people are ready. Their brains are primed to take in that information. And again, that learning that happens all the time inside of school and after the bell rings.
Okay. I guess, Erica, what are your thoughts on that as you're kind of looking forward into the next several months of work?
You cut out for a second. Can you finish that question, the last part of that question?
Oh, yeah. I guess, what are your thoughts on what Carolyn talked about in terms of the next few months of work? You mentioned mental health being a legislative priority for your group.
Well, first of all, Carolyn, I'm so glad that you're here and having this conversation. This has actually been a conversation that I've been having with several parents in our district as well. And it's heartbreaking to see how many families around you that you know and love are dealing with very, very serious issues with their kids. And it's very isolating and they don't know where to go for help. So I'll get to the legislative part in a second, Augusta, but I do have a question for Carolyn. So I love this resource that the Surgeon General's report. It sounds like it has a lot of ideas for different sectors of the community. So here's my question. If we have viewers on here today who are in rural districts who are recognizing that this is a problem and they know something needs to change and they need to help, but they don't know where to start, right? They don't have access to all of the wonderful programs that you guys have up in Tulsa or some of the things going on in Oklahoma City. So my question is, from your perspective, if somebody's interested in pulling these resources together from a community perspective and bringing all the silos into one group, where do they start?
Yeah, great question. So, and I can tell that organizing is in your heart, Ed, because that's where your brain is going. And I think that's important for all of us, particularly for folks in smaller communities or even smaller organizations to, there is power in that collective impact. So, a couple things I would say is, one, we're doing our very best to put all of these resources on our website. Again, the Surgeon General's report does have some very specific suggestions for families and caregivers. So I would just say, interpersonally for you, that may be something that, you might want to share with folks. But it is a very isolating thing to have a child that is in crisis. And it's very, very hard. So I'm hopeful that these resources are a benefit. The other thing that I would say is because we do believe that these relationships with caring adults and connecting young people with something that they're passionate about, whether it's a hobby, sports, chess, whatever it may be, is so critical to keeping them engaged and keeping them excited about learning. To think about all of those people in your given community that might not only already have some skills that they could translate into service of young people, but may already be doing that work. But they're doing it in quiet corners of neighborhoods, in faith-based programs, in other maybe more formal after-school programs. So how do you bring all of those providers together in a way where you create kind of a community of practice for them, so that not only do they feel more connected to other adults who are doing the same work, but you can leverage some of the resources that are available. So, for example, some of the resources that are available around equipping young people with the vocabulary and the skills to be able to talk about how they're feeling so that they may understand why they're feeling angry or frustrated. Those are things around professional development, professional learning that I feel like would be really valuable for a community of any size, particularly as you start to rally those adults in your community who are doing that work with young people. I think, there are a couple of other things to think about, and Dr. Cox may have a better handle on this than I do, but around the ability to be able to partner with a school district. So if you are a community member, if you are someone who has a dance program, a horseback riding program, a literacy after school club. I mean, any of those kinds of things, there are opportunities for you to partner with the school district and to collectively seek out dollars, both through the State Department of Education and through other independent and individual foundations and grants. So I think there are several ways to look at it. One, I would think about that sort of community of practice where you're supporting one another in the work that you're doing, but you're also taking best practice from other places and bringing that into your own work. Secondly, thinking about how you might partner with the school district or perhaps partner together to have multiple programs approach either a funding source or State Department of Education in seeking out those resources. So again, there is a lot of power in that collective work. So I think that you're smart to think about it.
So Augusta, to circle back to the question that you have, and
Certainly.
some of my ideas around this need to address mental health care within our schools. And I'm going to try to verbalize this as simply as I can because it's a complicated thing. We hear the word innovation a lot, right? And when I look back to what happened back in 2019 with Senate Bill 441 in particular with 4-day schools, for example, I think this is a place where we could hopefully start getting our lawmakers to think outside of the box and really latch on to that word innovation and put it into play. So, for example, when we were back having this fight about the 4-day school, one of the things that was really difficult to get across to our legislators was the ability for schools to be able to innovate on the 5th day and offer some of these wraparound services, offer parenting classes, group counseling, laundry, food service, those types of things. And so I think we're in a place now where the pandemic and this situation we have going on with the explosion of mental health issues within our communities, I think, that issue with the 4-day school is still kind of sitting in limbo. So the legislature voted to change some things up with the State Department of Education promulgating some rules around what districts would have to achieve if they wanted to be able to keep that 4-day. So then that never got voted on. And then the pandemic hit, COVID hit, and it all just kind of went to the wayside, as it should have, because there were other things more pressing to deal with. But here we have now, school districts are getting ready to have to submit their calendars for next year. And I would like to challenge our lawmakers, first of all, to go back to the promise that you gave your communities, that you're going to develop some rules that school districts can actually achieve, which right now nobody will achieve it because the test scores for the last 2 years are in the toilet. So, to me, when I think outside of the box and innovate, when you have an opportunity to, when you talk about, especially in a rural district, how big is your district, Dr. Cox? How many square miles?
We're right at 200.
Okay, so you've got a lot of busing to do, right? And so having after-school programs is a little bit more difficult to keep kids engaged because they have to be able to get transported home. And sometimes that's a long time on the bus. And so if we could allow school districts to continue with 1,080 hours put into a 4-day and leave that 5th day open to bring in some of these community services where, maybe we could even provide transportation. I don't know, but I just think that we're really missing an opportunity here. Instead of digging our heels in and doing the things that we've always done because that's the way we've always done it, we have a real opportunity, particularly in our rural districts that face different challenges like transportation, to bring this 4-day thing, not that everybody has to do it, but to allow it to be an option for districts if they do want to innovate and meet some of these needs to get kids connected with mentors on Friday, mentoring programs, counseling programs, all of these wraparound services. So for me, I mean, it just kind of popped into my head with this conversation. I haven't really fleshed it out and thought about it that much, but you know, that's one of the things we were really going to be pushing for anyway, is getting this 4-day school thing settled. And I think what we have now, because of the pandemic, is instead of looking at that as an embarrassment, which I've heard from some politicians, we look at it as an opportunity that we can innovate, we can address the mental health needs through a creative calendar, but we can also circle back to the teacher recruitment and retention without spending an extra dime. We can bring some of these teachers back possibly in these school districts that border other states, because they can have the flexibility of working in a 4-day school. So like I said, I haven't fleshed it out, but to me, as I listen to all of the great things that Carolyn has been talking about and how do you implement that in a rural area, I think we have an opportunity in front of us this legislative session to kind of back off of that and give schools more flexibility to innovate and bring some of these things in that kids need so that they can get back to learning. So that's it.
Yeah, I would love to just give a plug for innovation if I could. We were really, really concerned last spring about what it was going to look like when young people in our community came back to the classroom, and what it was really going to look like this fall. And I think those concerns have been borne out. But in between that, right, is summer, this critical period in summer. And so we galvanized, and I'm just so proud of our community for doing this. So philanthropic community, our Board of County Commissioners, our school district, all of our nonprofit partners, pooled resources, and I'm talking about dollars, staffing, marketing, recruitment, training, everything, to work together, in-school educators and out-of-school time educators together, to put together a 3-month opportunity to bridge for young people their time in the classroom from May to August. And it was sort of the number one rule was it can't feel like summer school, right? So even though we've always done it that way, and we've always thought about this as being punitive, you know, if you're in danger of not passing or you need credit recovery, we're not going to do that this summer. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about what kids actually want, what will get them in a place where we can connect them with those adults, we can make sure that those basic needs are being met, and we can reignite that passion that kids naturally have for learning. So we sort of said, okay, nobody's allowed to say summer school. And furthermore, when we're talking about summer programming, we don't want to pretend that unfinished learning has happened, because it has. But we really believe that engagement is the most important thing. And this sounds really simple, but it's a huge shift in thinking and spending and planning and hiring and program design. So really it was like, think about a camp experience. We had professional development, honestly, where we were coming in with supports for educators to help them understand about how to manage a camp setting as opposed to a classroom setting, right? And how to build that enthusiasm. And we had amazing success, served over a third of the entire school district, so over 11,000 kids at some point during the summer. All the programming was free. And it was all vetted around positive youth development principles, and really, really digging in with adults on the front end to talk about how are we going to make this so that it is a transformative experience for young people. And we are just now, having the opportunity to be able to take a look at what we believe are some of the results of that experiment, that innovation, and are already seeing that young people who participated in a minimum number of hours over the summer had almost 3 times the literacy spring to fall results as their non-participating peers. And we're seeing that where young people who participated in the summer programming actually had a modest but an increase in their math spring to fall. Those who did not participate lost ground. So we're talking about initial results, certainly, and things that we need to look into more. But by focusing on that engagement, that connection, you are able to move the needle on the unfinished learning. And so I think that that is so important for us to make sure that all of these things are in the mix, and that we do have the freedom, not only from rules, and certainly, we need to have those regulations around how our young people are learning, but we need also the ability to be creative and to be innovative and to be responsive to what we know the needs are in our individual communities. So that's my plug for innovation, is that, sometimes it doesn't always work. And that's the other thing. You can't be afraid to say, hey, we tried it and it didn't work. But to be bold, and to be smart about how you're mobilizing these resources and doing what works. And I will just add one last thing, and Dr. Cox, this is something that you said, and Erica, certainly teacher retention is an issue that you think about too. But we had, I think it was over 90% satisfaction from the classroom educators. So these are regular teachers who raised their hand and said, okay, I'll do this summer thing, even though I'm going to pull my hair out and I don't want to ever see a computer again. These teachers came back and said, this is why I actually wanted to be a teacher in the first place, because we were able to do this particular world history credit recovery course as a medieval summer camp. And talk about these things in a way that was engaging for kids, that helped them see the connection to their classroom learning. And by the way, it was really fun. So I think that that's one thing we want to make sure that we aren't losing in all of the really serious issues that we're talking about, is that learning should be fun. And we want to make it for adults and fun for young people, and get people back to a place where we know they can thrive.
I would say the baseline for what is normal in schools has certainly shifted. And so perhaps now is like a moment in education when different ideas will be accepted. There's lots of reason to explore new options. There's a lot of things that have been really hard on schools, and a lot of pivoting and innovation that's had to happen. Any final thoughts before we wrap the show? I just have so enjoyed your insights. I'm just sitting here soaking up all this information. Like, wow, this has just been such an insightful discussion with all of you. Any final thoughts?
I'd just like to say I appreciated what Carolyn said about engagement and connection, because that's the key to making lifelong learners and having our kids love to learn. So I think that's a key. And doing the summer school, and not calling it summer school, but just summer enrichment, summer learning. That's what we try to do out here. We try to have a lot of fun with them, but we also allow our teachers to be teachers and to be able to work and use their creativity. And you kind of alluded to that. So I appreciate that.
I would like to add one final thought from me, since we were talking about politics and legislation and legislative session coming up. We also have an election coming up this year. And so the final thought I would like to leave with people is to really encourage everyone to pay attention. This year, I think, is going to be a tipping point. And if you support public schools, you want to advocate for keeping your schools healthy, getting everybody back on track, you really need to pay attention to what happens this legislative session. We are going to be releasing some legislative report cards. At some point, I haven't decided if we're going to do it before session or after, but it's important to know how your elected officials are actually voting versus how they tell you they're going to during election season, right? And so I just encourage everybody to if you're not already engaged, get engaged. Make sure you are registered to vote. We have some very, very important elections coming up. Many of those will take place and be finalized in June. So don't just think you're going to roll out in November and, check a box and be able to do some good for public schools. You got to be engaged, and you got to show up in June when those primaries start. So that is the one thing that I really, really want to encourage everybody to do. And, shake down your friends and your family and make sure everybody's registered and they're out there and they know what's going on. And if people need a place to follow, to keep up with what's going on, I'd like to invite everybody watching to come join the Oklahoma Rural Schools Coalition. We are on Facebook. And I think for a bunch of volunteers and parents, we do a pretty good job of tracking it and keeping people updated and giving them direction on what to do with their legislators. So that's my final thing, is get involved and get registered and make your voice heard at the ballot box.
Erica Wright, thank you so much from Oklahoma Rural Schools Coalition. And I saw a couple of people who posted in the Facebook group that there might be discussion after this. So if you're interested in more commentary on this discussion, you might be able to find it there tonight.
Yeah.
Carolyn Shaw with the Opportunity Project out of Tulsa, you mentioned some great resources and some interesting ideas on how your methods could be applied to rural areas, kind of this community building around schools. And so I'll make sure to link your page information in the article that goes with the show so people can access your information. And Dr. John Cox, thank you so much for joining us from PEGS. I posted a map of your district, and when we were prepping for the show, I was like, just so you know, I'm going to make sure that you have an opportunity to tell everybody what's great about your district. So tell us what's special about this.
Oh, absolutely. Well, we're country, we're rural. And I tried to think of that answer, but right now, one of our young people is playing in the Canadian Football League. And we also have another one that graduated here that's in the Yankees system playing baseball. And so not only them, and those are their accolades, but we just have a lot of young people that are coming out of our schools being extremely, I don't even know the exact word, but they're just really excelling. And so I'm proud of that. I'm proud that we can lay the foundation. I'm proud we can be a small part of that. But I just think it's pretty neat that we have two people in the major leagues that are from our community.
You got some in the water up there. That's awesome. Okay, Dr. Cox, thank you so much. Thank you to all of you and to all of our viewers for tuning in this evening. Again, this video will be on demand along with the rest of our Education Watch Oklahoma episodes with more information from our guests from this evening. Big thank you to Scott Mitchell for hosting the show on his platform and providing support, and to Ryan Welton, who's providing support through News 9 and News on 6. So from everybody with Education Watch Oklahoma, have a great rest of your night.
Thank you.
Thank you.